All right, we're going to get downright philosophical today, I guess.
Well, political philosophical.
Philosophical. I can't even say the word.
I hope I get a falafel by the end of this program.
I'm Peter Christian. That's John King over there, and Dr. Ramona Gray joining us in studio. How you doing?
Yeah, fine, thank you. Good morning.
Yeah, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you.
So, is this your first time on the radio?
No, it isn't actually.
Okay.
I've got interviewed before with public radio. So
Public radio.
yes. So
Wow.
this is my first talk radio.
Well, this one is we actually pay you to be here. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Anyway, so where are we going today, John?
Well, we are having our political science on the radio day today.
Right.
And Ramona, I believe, is going to talk about two kinds of freedom. But since this is talk back, I have no idea where we're going. So let's just start. I was told the title was going to be Two Kinds of Freedom. What are the two kinds of freedom?
Ladies and gentlemen, Ramona.
Oh, thank
Go
you.
ahead.
Well, it seems to me that certainly American presidents, presidential candidates, legislators all talk about freedom. Citizens all talk about freedom. But do we all mean the same thing when we talk about freedom? And actually, it seems to me there's actually two types of freedom that we often use and aren't conscious of. And that is, we mean sometimes freedom as an end in itself. That is a value to which we value it regardless of what we do with it. Or freedom as a means to achieving other things like democracy, happiness, a good society. And one contemporary political theorist, I'm a political theorist, but a contemporary theorist by the name of Isaiah Berlin wrote a famous essay called Two Concepts of Liberty in 1969, in which he really plays out these political implications of these two ideas of freedom. And what he was referring to as freedom as an end, good for its own sake, is a freedom that is, he called it negative, but he didn't mean negative as in bad. And then he talked about freedom as a means to other ends or goods as positive freedom. And Isaiah noted that people who favor negative freedom or freedom as an end favor it for its own sake. It's a primary value. Whereas people who like and value positive freedom or freedom as a means value it because it enables human beings to achieve other things, like, again, happiness, a Christian life, truth, a healthy personality. You fill in the blank. Okay, does that make sense?
Sure.
It makes sense. Let me ask you another question a little bit. Before Mr. Berlin got on the scene, there was another philosopher by the name of Kierkegaard.
Yeah.
And he talked about freedom aesthetically and ethically.
Yes.
And do you see any correlations between those types of freedom and the positive and negative freedoms that Berlin was talking about?
That's a good question. Well, actually, Kierkegaard is talking really kind of about a positive freedom, because he's talking about freedom in terms of what it produces, in terms of an aesthetic sensibility or an ethical sensibility. So the freedom as an end tends to be a power view of freedom. Freedom as a means tends to be a moral view of freedom. The power view of freedom, those who embrace it, they want to know, well, who governs me, if you will? What are the limits on my freedom? Whereas people who have a moral view of freedom, they want to know, again, well, what does it mean to be a morally free human being or an aesthetically sensitive human being?
Okay, I'm going to play the stupid guy in the room because I am. So I like to go back to definitions.
Yes.
I would like to know, from a political scientist perspective, what is your definition of freedom?
Well, that's what this is all about,
Okay,
right? Is
all right.
how are we defining freedom?
All right.
Do we define it as a primary value, a value that we value regardless of what it accomplishes?
Right.
Whether a person uses freedom for good or for bad. That's the negative or the using it as a end.
Okay.
Or do we value freedom, and this is our definition, do we value it or define it in terms of what it enables human beings to become?
Okay.
Or that if you value freedom as a means, then you say, well, to be a free person, this is what you must be.
Right.
So it's more prescriptive.
And I think also that there's another context when we're talking about the definitions, because freedom from the viewpoint of the individual is quite a bit different than freedom from the viewpoint of Congress, for
Yes.
example, right? And so my freedom to go get an apple can be severely restricted if the government slaps my wrist on my way to get the apple, or if the store manager slaps my wrist on the way to get the apple, right?
Or if the farmer slaps your wrist because you haven't paid for the
or
apple.
my wife or my kids take the apple before I get there, and there's no more apple. Right? So there's certainly I guess the question that I think, to go back to Peter's question, is there a fundamental underlying definition of freedom that all of these different aspects of freedom can partake in?
Your very question about quote unquote wanting a fundamental definition of freedom in and of itself is suggesting, again, a kind of freedom, as a positive view of freedom. Because what you're looking for is a criteria. In other words, how do we determine whether a people are free enough now, or really free? Now, one way, again, if you use the more freedom as an end, is freedom is merely having choice. More choices you have, the freer you are. I think Americans tend to look at freedom that way.
Sure.
Right? But then the other freedom, that freedom as a means, is saying, well, wait a minute. How significant are our choices? That is what may make us free.
I think to put this in a political context would be helpful, because a lot of people see this play out, this debate between the two types of freedom.
Yes.
Which I think the way that we talked about it earlier, where you mentioned negative and positive freedoms, is very helpful, right? So if you're libertarian-minded like myself, you see negative freedom as what government should enforce. And by that means, you should be able to do as much as you want without the government interfering as possible. So I should be able to, walk outside and get up whatever job I want, and whoever has that ability to fire me should have the ability to fire me, and trade should be able to go on as freely as possible. And I see those things as good. But someone that would take the positive side of freedom might say, well, John, your choices really aren't that great. You don't get the choice of any job you want because you're stupid. And you could have a better job if you got a free education.
Well, now hold
and
on.
if you had, if you had a different skin color, and if you had a different inclination sexually, you might have a job in this department that you can't get because of this. And maybe we can give you those things.
Hold on. I want to be an NBA basketball player. I want to be able to dunk a basketball and make a three-pointer with my eyes closed.
Would you consider being the basketball?
So why don't I have the freedom to do that?
Well, again, this is where you're raising some very provocative issues about whether merely having choice is being free, or is it about making the right choices? Now, I can see a libertarian saying, oh, wait a minute now, who's going to tell me whether my choices and how I use freedom is right or wrong, right?
Right.
And there's the power view of freedom. Very concerned about who tells us what we can and cannot do with it. But then there's that moral view that's saying, well, wait a minute now, your choices are always limited. And they're not always limited by government, but they're limited by the choices that people have made before you, may indeed restrict or expand the choices you have today. And so therefore, the pertinent question is, what kinds of limits are going to be important or useful to freedom?
And we haven't even got into the marketplace yet.
No.
Well, we lost my apple. My apple is taken, clearly.
And I still can't dunk a basketball.
Yeah.
And that's where the marketplace comes in, right? So we're
I can get you a ladder. If your wife will let you go up the ladder again, I can get you a ladder and we'll get you to dunk that basketball.
As long as I have an elevator to get down, I'm good.
Peter has a ladder falling off problem.
Yeah. We are just enough. I do it once, and he never lets me forget about it. We'll be right back. Okay, we're back on Talkback. 721-1290 is our number, 1-800-568-5309. Okay, we've kind of opened up the door of discussion about two different aspects, if you will, of freedom. So John King is here. I'm Peter Christian, Dr. Ramona Gray from the Political Science Department at the University of Montana.
Yeah, we were talking about negative and positive freedom, or at least Isaiah Berlin's concepts of negative and positive freedom. And a lot of people, including myself, think that the latter term shouldn't even really be called freedom, but more of capability or ability or power. Seems to be the concept there. What are your thoughts on that line of thinking?
Well, you wouldn't be alone, because actually Isaiah Berlin, agreed with you. I mean, freedom's freedom. Freedom isn't, shouldn't be compiled with other things, etc. However, if you were to be critical of the negative freedom, one could say, and by the way, there's an opposite criticism for one or the other, is that problem with it is it can suffer from too little content, the nature of freedom. As John Dewey once said, release of force does not give direction to the force that is set free.
Right.
Which means, if you open this up, that means people can do absolutely anything they want. Let's hope there's not sadists and masochists out there, right? To which, that's a choice.
There's a very popular movie that came out several years ago called The Purge. Have you ever heard about that?
No.
Where for 12 hours, one day a year, people are allowed to do anything.
Yeah.
There's no law enforcement. They can murder, rob, rape, steal, kill, whatever, and there'll be no criminal penalties. So it's basically survival of the fittest. Everybody either go crazy or go run and hide for 12 hours.
It's like Rumspringa on steroids.
Right.
Yeah, so
right.
anyway,
Right.
so-
And that kind of a liberty, which Montesquieu said was really kind of a very scary liberty, where you can do absolutely anything you want. But now that's the criticism, of course, of negative freedom is too little content.
Can I respond to that real quick?
Yeah.
Because the opposite idea that you can direct where liberty should go becomes dangerous, because in that direction you limit some liberties. And I'll give you a quick example from our conversation yesterday. For example, if you grow up in a culture, let's say a very constrictive religious culture, let's just say Wahhabi Islam, okay? And you're taught as a woman in this culture, you have to do these certain things, you have to wear these certain clothes, you have to behave this certain way. And then you're introduced to Western society and you tell the reporter, well, no, I believe all these things.
Yeah.
Did you choose all those things from a free point of view or not? Were they forced upon you by your society or your culture?
Right. And so what you're raising is the criticism of positive freedom on the other side. So if negative freedom's weakness is that it suffers from too little content, the positive freedom side suffers from too much content to freedom.
Okay, a really good example of this is in this morning's newspaper. Okay, have you a chance to see it?
Not yet.
There's a story about a girl. I went to Helena High School, so when I saw this, it piqued my interest because that's where I went to high school. A girl, I think freshman or sophomore, I'm not sure what her grade is. Anyway, she had decided it was just cumbersome wearing a brassiere, so she just decided not to wear one. And this went on for quite a while, and finally, one of the school counselors said, "Would you mind coming to my office for a minute?" And she comes in and says, "What's going on?" She said, "What, did you forget something today?" And I'm just, quoting out of the paper. And she said, "What do you mean?" "Well, you're not wearing a brassiere." I said, "Well, yeah, I haven't worn one for quite some time." "Well, you need to go home and put one on." "Well, why?" And so anyway, so now this young woman has become, if you will, a poster child for the freedom for women to be able to express themselves in a clothing manner where they feel the most comfortable and the most, if you will, free.
Exactly.
And then you've got this high school administration that says, no, the dress code said all girls must have a brassiere, and all boys must wear, I don't know, whatever, there's any, restrictions on boys, but
I was never asked to wear a brassiere.
but anyway, and so many people are saying that's fundamentally unfair, and so she should be able to be free to wear or not wear whatever she wants.
Right, and of course, the other response too is, well, but she can pick another school to go to, where they'll let her be as free as she wants to be. I mean, right?
But
she still has choice.
That's one of the only.
Right,
Well, there's two public high schools in Helena.
Right.
So anyway.
Okay. But again, it's the idea that people ought to be able to have choice, and it's assuming that people are fairly rational.
Right.
It's her rational decision to wear a bra or not to wear a bra, right? And so therefore, it shouldn't be dictated as to what she does.
Well, I wanted to ask you, from your viewpoint as a political science professor,
Yes.
when these concepts of freedom get into the political world, where do you see America in that lineup? Do we line up more with the negative liberties or with the positive freedoms or liberties? I'm using the word interchangeably here.
I think we tend to line up more with the negative, right? I think Americans very predominantly have always identified choice and being unrestrained. This is why going out to the frontier, right? In the West, we can do what we wish, including not wearing brassieres, right?
The wild, wild West.
Right,
yeah,
exactly.
There you go. Yeah.
And so I think it is freedom as an end in itself. Do what you want to do, and don't tell me what I should do with my freedom.
Now, the contrary to that, it seems to me, the Soviet Union would be a good example of a government entity that was trying to enforce positive freedom.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, but I think you have to be a bit careful that all positive freedom equals totalitarianism. It may be that again to be free and to really understand freedom, I also should have perhaps an education. How can I really be aware of my choices unless I'm also informed about my choices? So positive freedom isn't necessarily that camel now snicking its nose and we're going to go full-blown totalitarianism. It might say, wait a minute now, what does it mean to remain a free person? What is the criteria? That maybe you need to have education.
How much responsibility do you bear for yourself
right.
to maintain and
right.
create that freedom?
And to be aware.
Okay.
Jefferson said, Thomas Jefferson, he said,
Some guy. Yeah.
Right, that guy, Jefferson. Well, he said, a nation, if a nation expects to be ignorant and free, it expects what never was and never will be.
Wow. That's a rhyme. Hey, we're going to come right back. Mark, we'll get your phone call in this is a fascinating discussion. We're just now scraping the surface. So we will be back after this quick timeout. Yeah, we're back on Talkback. 721-1290 is the number. Dr. Ramona Gray joining us from the University of Montana Political Science Department, talking about freedom. And Mark very graciously holding. Good morning, Mark. You're on Talkback. Go ahead.
Morning, Ramona. I got a question about grade schools and whose freedom trumps the freedom of the school, freedom of the parents not to sorry for the word, immunize their children with this specific immunizations, or the school's policy that every child must have another shots.
Okay, so we have parents who are perhaps fundamentally or religiously opposed to immunization, and their child goes to school. What freedom do they have to say, no, we don't want to do that?
Well, again,
Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, freedom isn't just. We always talk about freedom as an individual thing, but the individual is kind of an abstract thing. I suppose when you're talking about the individual from the parent's perspective, yes, they want to be able to decide whether to immunize their children. But if I'm also a parent and my child is in school with your child who's not immunized and your child gets ill, then I'm concerned about my freedom. And it affects and impacts what choices I have with my child in terms of taking care of that child effectively, etc.
So at some point we have to give way from our own personal freedoms for what's best for the group. But then how far do you take that? And that's where government comes in and takes the ball and runs with it, right?
Right. But again, I think these are things that should always be perennial debates. I don't think there's any hard or fast lines that we have to draw or should draw.
Do you think the two are by nature always in conflict, negative and positive liberty?
They can be, and it's interesting. If you view them as in conflict with each other, inevitably you're going to end up favoring one versus the other. If you see them as complementary to each other, then I think you can see them as maybe being in tension, but maybe we need both. We need both for an open and engaging society.
So here's what I see as being necessary to be able to understand what you're talking about. You need to have a certain modicum of intelligence and education so that you can understand the concepts of liberty.
Ooh,
right?
you are going down the road of positive freedom. Watch out now, Soviet Union coming on.
Well, I see it. Get that Hitler mustache off your lip.
Well,
I actually
what's wrong with having education?
I absolutely agree with you. But notice what you've done. You've now added a criteria to being a truly free person.
Okay.
Right?
But you have to be able to understand your freedom.
I agree. I totally agree. And this is Jefferson. Jefferson would agree with you. You're in very good company.
I'm just feel so dumb. Anyway, tell you what, we're almost at our break. Rick, I'm going to ask you, so we don't have time to get your call in. So if you'll hang on the phone, we definitely want to get your comment or your question. Dr. Ramona Gray joining us from the University of Montana Department of Political Science. I'm going to get in trouble in this. I know I'm not going to get a passing grade. I just know. So we'll take a break and come right back at the top of the hour. I hope you'll join us. Lines are open at 721-1290. Stay with us. Welcome back to Talkback, brought to you this morning by Western Montana, New Holland, south of the Y on Highway 10, across from the Axemen. Spray Green Lawn, providing lawn aeration services. And weed control, save 15% if you mention this message. Call 207-9273. And by Office City, as they celebrate 100 years in business. See them for office supplies and furniture, price match guarantee, and free next-day delivery. Here we are back. We're talking about liberty, freedom, and positive and negative aspects, and we have to kind of loosen up our definition of positive and negative, because for me, positive means good, negative means bad. So I'm learning. I'm learning here. So that's what it's all about.
Well, yeah. So just to catch everybody up, we've our guest, Ramona Gray, professor at the University of Montana Political Philosophy Department, was describing Isaiah Berlin's dichotomy, if you will, of positive and negative freedoms. Negative freedoms, real quick definition, Ramona.
Again, it's just freedom of choice, and you're valuing freedom for its own sake.
And positive freedom is,
again, you're looking at freedom in terms of what it does for people, and in terms of allowing a means for us to achieve a democratic society, a Christian life, equality, the good, whatever it might be.
All right. So with that, we're going to callers. And by the way, you have the freedom to call in. The phone number here is 721-1290. We also have Facebook comments. I'll be reading those after this call.
Okay, here we go. Rick, thank you for holding, sir. You're on Talkback. Go ahead.
Yeah, about the young lady that didn't want to wear a bra.
Yes, sir.
School is actually an institute for learning, and they have to learn, decorum and discipline. And they are, pubescent teens, and kids are maturing a little faster now. And
as I can speak as one of those former teenagers, that a woman in the class without a bra would severely inhibit my ability to learn.
well, yeah, you're a teenager. You're distracted by your hormones and situations like that. And the kids, they're being taught guidance and social behavior. And once you're educated in your social behavior and what's really accepted in public for a decent job and such. Once you graduate and you go out into the real world, then you can, I guess, you're free to do whatever you think is proper.
If you think when you want to get out into the workplace that you're free to do whatever you want, however you want, I think you're sadly mistaken there, Rick.
Well, no, I do have a job. But that's what I'm saying is once you get into the real world, if you try to pull some of this stuff off, you probably won't have a job very long.
Okay. Well, Rick, let's get Ramona's view. Thanks for your call. We appreciate it.
Pull this stuff off.
Yeah. Okay. So, Rick, I'm sorry, Ramona, go ahead.
Well, Rick, actually, you're making a good point, and that is, as positive freedom thinkers who see freedom as a means will quickly point out is that our choices are always limited in this life. It's limited, like you note, is by our employers, our employees. We have certain standards or that we've got decorums we must live by. And it's influenced our freedoms and our choices not only by other people, but even by our environment. And so the important issue that positive freedom thinkers raise is what sort of limits are consistent with our being free. And I think this is a very important question that you're also raising. Is wearing a bra or not wearing a bra a genuine criteria for being free or not? Okay.
Well, and the other thing is you have, hopefully, the wisdom of older people who are in the Office of Administrators, who have a history, who know what goes on in schools, and they understand the psychology and physiology of young minds full of mush, as someone is famous for saying, that to create an atmosphere in which learning can be accomplished effectively, certain rules have to be applied. And one of those has been decided that young women have to wear brasiers.
Absolutely. And we also make different standards of choices for children versus adults. Because, again, we're presuming that children are they're still open to new ideas. They haven't yet developed the judgment, I dare say, that adults have.
The medulla oblongata has not yet been completely formed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We have quite a few Facebook and comments that were given to me over the phone that I'll go ahead and read. Most of these are definitions of freedom. Mm-hmm. So we'll start with, Myrna called in first. Her definition she wanted me to read was, freedom ends where someone else's freedom begins. One's personal freedom ends where someone else's freedom begins. Another comment was, you are free to do as you please until you interfere with the rights of others. Mm-hmm. That'd be a pretty good description of negative freedoms or basic rules in a country where negative freedoms were strongly enforced.
Yes, you'll notice that negative freedom tends to, at most, define what we shouldn't do with our freedom. Mm-hmm. Right? We shouldn't harm other people, interfere with other people. And again, that certainly is consistent with looking at freedom as an end in itself. It doesn't, again, tell us very much what we actually should do or what you might do to enhance my freedom.
But I think a really great description of negative freedom is most those in the American strain view it is the life, liberty, or property of John Locke, which was later turned into life, liberty, or pursuit of happiness by our founders, specifically Jefferson. But the life, liberty, and property is pretty easy to see where someone's taking my stuff,
yes,
putting me in prison, or taking my life.
Right.
And at those points, that's where government needs to step in and enforce a restriction on the liberty to do those things.
And that therefore suggests that just any choices isn't necessarily a sign of freedom. If a robber tells me my money or my life,
You're still free.
Right, exactly. Right, I'm still free because he's given me a choice. Well, come on now. By the way, if I can quote Thomas Hobbes, was great on this. He said, there's no obligation on any man which arises not from some act of his own, for all men equally are by nature free. He goes on to say, therefore, if I redeem myself from a thief by promising him money, I am bound to pay it. For a contract entered into through fear is still binding as any other. Well, now, come on. By the way, Hobbes backed off from that a bit, right?
I would guess so.
Okay, right? Does that
if I have a gun to my head, then
yeah. If any, so that means right. Any contract that's coercive, that doesn't necessarily. That's not what we're thinking about freedom of contract.
And that's where the phrase come in. I made him an offer he couldn't refuse.
Exactly.
Okay, we're up against a break. You have another Facebook comment?
I have tons.
Okay.
I'll read them when we get back.
Yeah, and we also have Chuck on the line, so this is a very fruitful discussion, and I hope it's very freeing for you. Oh, God, she just kicked me. Okay, we're going to come right back with Talk Back in a moment. Hey, we're back on Talk Back. 721-1290 is the number right here on KGVO. I'm Peter Christian. John King is over there. Dr. Ramona Gray from the University of Montana Political Science Department joining us. We're talking about positive, negative aspects of freedom. And so people are on the phone. People are on TalkBack, on Facebook.
I assume they're on TalkBack.
I hope they are. Chuck, good morning. You're on TalkBack. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is what happens when we think too hard as a society.
I try not to make a habit of it.
Where the first symptoms of how this is going south or bad is individuals, employers used to be able to say, my environment for my customers will be this. And then, now you have to have transvestites at the counter. You got to have this kind of person dressing this way, or someone halfway in between. And all the freedom of owning a business and saying, this is the environment for my customer is now gone. And the same with schools. Is schools a party and a social environment, or is it where you go to learn so you can earn a living and become part of society? It's an A or B, very simple decision. If someone wants to be sexual at school, I'm sorry, this is not the environment. You don't have to attend school if you don't want to. Just go home.
Okay, Chuck, thanks for the call. So, Ramona, your response to what Chuck said.
Well, again, it's always a power issue of freedom, right? Who has the power to determine what criteria they should serve a customer? Is it the power of the employer or the business owner? How much power should he have to discriminate or choose who he's going to serve or not serve in his business versus the customer? Does a customer, how much power do they have to go into one business or freedom to go into one business versus another business? So again, these are where, by the way, our freedoms are not just limited necessarily by government, but also by each other.
Yeah, and as I mentioned before, we're just now scraping the surface of what I like to call the marketplace.
Yes.
And one of the things that has come up over the last several years is gay marriage.
Yes.
Or same-sex marriage. And let's say I'm a baker and I'm a Christian, and I vehemently oppose that concept. So some people come to me, I want you to bake me a cake. As well, I can't. It just goes against my philosophical bent, and I'm I will be happy to refer you to someone right across the street. They do a wonderful job baking. They specialize in this and that and the other thing. I would, in fact, walk you across the street so that you can be happy. And I want you to get to the cake. I just can't bake it for you. And they turn around and sue you, and they would make a lot of money, and I go out of business. And so where's my freedom?
How did you come up with this hypothetical? This is really intricate.
I can't imagine anybody would ever do that. But anyway, go ahead.
Well, you must be a tremendous baker. Because I really want a cake from you.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be very disappointed if I can't have the service of your skills and your art
But I think,
for my wedding.
But it goes beyond whether or not you're a good baker. It goes into punishing you because you refuse to bend to somebody else's political philosophy.
Well, again, I suppose, yes, from the best perspective of the baker, but then if I'm the customer, it is, what
same perspective, though, right? Even the customer is wanting them to bend to their political will or their personal freedom.
And the employer
and
the baker wants them to bend to their,
How so?
Right? Well, in other words, they want only customers who meet their criteria of what's acceptable.
Haven't you seen the sign above the I have the right to refuse service to anyone?
Yeah, they used to do that in the South, too, okay, right? For certain racial groups, to which they made the similar argument. And so you'll notice, by the way, Jefferson often would say, and this is very true of negative freedom proponents, those who embrace it, often have something to protect, i.e. their rights.
Sure.
Whereas the proponents of positive freedom often are trying to seek something to gain. Like this can be for greater, equality of opportunity, or greater rights for transsexuals or rights for women. So they are wanting to say, oh, wait a minute now, to be free isn't just you have the right to do just whatever you want. No, if I'm going to be free, I need to have opportunities. I need to have a choice. You're limiting my choice of bakers.
Yeah, and your choice is right across the street. I mean, and they'll they'll even do it cheaper.
But you're only giving me one choice, right? And you've just said choice is good. And so you're saying choice is good for you as the baker. You want choice, but you don't want to give me choice.
Well, we have some definitions of freedom on Facebook that I should go through. If you'll let me. Give me the freedom to do so.
Absolutely.
Katie says, the other side of freedom is responsibility. One does not exist without the other.
Yes.
I think that's very wise.
Okay.
All right. Elena says,
I love Katie. She's so smart.
What is your opinion of Ayn Rand's definition of freedom? And then Rena, apparently they're tag teaming here because Rena posted a definition, at least, from Ayn Rand. She says, quote, freedom is in a political context means freedom from government coercion. It does not mean freedom from the landlord or freedom from the employer or freedom from the laws of nature, which do not provide men with automatic prosperity. It means freedom from the coercive power of the state and nothing else. That's from Conservatism and Obituary by Rand.
Yes, and again, it's very interesting. It's very much negative in the sense, again, it's focusing on freedom from coercion, specifically from government. However, the only difficulty is it's a narrow interpretation of coercion. It's narrowly interpreting coercion as coming principally from government. But there can be other sources of coercion in society generally, from one's neighbor, from one's baker. Okay, right, from one's employer.
Sure.
And so it's not just that, and John Stuart Mill, by the way, recognized this. Coercion can also come from one's peers, majority opinion coercion in society, which can be very subtle and in a way, even as de Tocqueville noted, even more tyrannical. Try going out to a movie. I used to tell my students this for the fun of it. Mm-hmm. Go out and see a movie together with a group of friends, and your group of friends rave about that movie. For the heck of it, you decide you don't like it. And suddenly see how you feel and your group of friends, the majority of whom like it, and how suddenly that will become very uncomfortable for you very quickly, even though you got the freedom to voice your opinion about this movie. There can be very subtle coercion from a majority as to what is, quote unquote, right and wrong.
It's like saying you didn't support Bernie Sanders in Missoula. I mean, there's some severe backlash.
Or perhaps, I'm not sure if it would be a better example. You go to a movie. I'm a movie buff, okay? And the person behind you keeps pushing their knees into the back of your seat and loudly, they crunkle the popcorn bag and they're, hey, hey, you know what happens next? And I paid $8-9 to get in. Why don't you shut up? But he's expressing his freedom because he paid to get in there too. So, where
he's got a subtle coercion going on with you, right? He's coercing you to listen to him.
I guess so.
Instead of listening to the movie.
So we're going to come right back. We have Diane and Catherine and Craig. And by the way, that drives me crazy when people do that. Okay, we're coming right back. Stay with us. Hey, we're back on Talk Back. It's a little bit of sunshine out there this morning. Really enjoying that. Dr. Ramona Gray joining us on Talk Back this morning. John King is right there. I'm Peter Christian, and we've got all sorts of phone calls. So let's jump right in and say good morning to Diane. Hi, Diane.
Good morning.
Hi. What's up?
Yeah, I just this is kind of one of those, not sure if it's positive, negative, or what, but it's not a hypothetical regarding freedom. This is just kind of a personal pet peeve of mine. Thinking through to the fact, because, with the bakery thing, it's a matter of choice. But what about, say, walking through the mall? You wander past Victoria's Secret and you are assaulted with soft pornography. And how does that play into the whole concept of freedom? My freedom from to not have to be confronted with that
sure.
sort of thing.
Now, Diane, is it the least bit helpful to know that there's not a human being in the world that ever actually looks like that? I mean, that they're actually computer generated? I'm just kidding.
Truth.
Anyway. So what do you think, Ramona?
Well, again, notice that it's. Therefore, it's not just a matter of choosing, or you can always. I suppose the mall owner will say, well, you can choose to walk around another part of the mall without going past Victoria's Secrets,
or you just keep your eyes straight ahead.
Or just keep your eyes straight ahead, right?
Like all men do.
And so, but. Again, if you're bracing an idea of positive freedom, you're going to be concerned about the environment. What sort of standards are there for choices? So, so that's, I think, Diane, where it also kind of comes into play.
So have you spoken to the management of the mall?
I have not personally yet, at any rate.
What? Let me ask you this. What would you say to them?
I think that's why I haven't spoken to them. I sort of stand there going...
Sure, okay.
Actually, but I think what I probably would say or may say is that actually considering that this is supposed to be an intimate wear shop, it actually presents more offensively than the closely related shop right along Brooks there, Fantasy for Adults. I think they're far more tasteful. At least
exhibited intimates, yes.
Anyway, that's. I was just curious about, how that all plays into, our freedoms.
Well, thanks for
you.
the call. It's like C.S. Lewis said, a man with an obsession has very little sales resistance.
Oh, there you go.
So there. Yeah.
The concept she's bringing up is one that often gets talked about with environmental policy, right? At what point does your use of the environment infringe on my health or my ability to use the environment, right?
Right.
I guess I have a bigger problem with the way that the question or the caller just framed it because, it doesn't just detract from life, liberty, or property necessarily of the walker by. Mm-hmm. Whereas pollution, you are taking away someone's life through giving them potentially lung cancer by letting our forests burn, National Forest Service, every summer, things like that. Anyway.
Or water quality, too.
Sure. All right, we got another caller on the line.
Line one's ringing, so let's get Catherine on the line. Hi, Catherine, you're on Talkback. Go ahead.
Okay, good morning. I wanted to go back to using your example of the baking issue.
All right.
Choosing. So you've got a baker choosing which customers to serve as freedom, and the customer's forced to. Let's see. How do I have this written? I write my stuff down. The customer's forced into choosing to sue the baker out of existence using coercive regulations to do so. I think there's an allied issue with the notion of freedom, and that is the concept of abstract rights versus concrete rights. Because concrete rights eventually lead to a form of slavery, because you are obligating human beings to give up their freedom of delivery or freedom of service to choose who they serve by forcing them to be at the mercy of those who need a particular service, like housing or food or medicine or donuts or cakes or whatever it is that they need.
You just described me in every way.
I'm sure there's a hierarchical need of donuts.
Maslow
Sure.
put donuts right at the top.
That's right. Well, anyway, I just wanted to say that freedom encompasses the concept of rights, abstract versus concrete also.
Okay.
Do you agree or disagree?
What do you think, Ramona?
Well, you raised, actually, the distinction is very interesting. It's a distinction that a traditional classical conservative Edmund Burke made between concrete versus abstract rights, but he uses it in a different way than the way you're using it. Real rights, he said, were rights that the courts recognize. These are rights that come through common law. So actually, he would refer to it as the rights of the business owner that is already recognized in terms of contracts and that, and then following the law. And then abstract rights were things like, these vague declarations of rights, like the French Declaration of Rights of Liberty, Égalité, equality of people. And he argued that those were very abstract. The problem with his
And they were highly abused.
Right. That's right. That's what Burke would argue, right? Because this is what led to revolutionaries, et cetera. The problem with this, and by the way, some use this with gay rights. They'll say gay rights are abstract rights, and not not the concrete rights. The problem is that when people appeal to abstract rights, is that because they really want to make them into real rights. We at one time appealed to the abstract rights of the natural rights of human beings. That was an abstract right. But our point was to make it into a real right to give us the power of self-governing. So it's kind of complicated in that way.
Okay, well, yeah, it is. It's just, to me, it makes the two go hand in hand, because if I don't have the right to structure my life the way I wish to, as long as I don't initiate a force against another person to force them to serve me one way or the other, or to force them to give up their property to me, I have the concrete or the abstract right to live my life as I so choose. Do you understand?
Right.
So, anyway,
Okay.
and that is freedom.
Yes.
Thanks, Catherine. We're up against a break. Appreciate your call. Craig and Walt, we'll get you guys on in a moment. Two lines open, 721-1290. I'm sure we have lots more Facebook comments as well. Dr. Ramona Gray joining us, talking about freedom. Freedom! Don't sing. Okay, we'll be right back. And we're back on Talkback. 721-1290 is our number, 1-800-568-5309. Dr. Ramona Gray, University of Montana Political Science Department, joining us here this morning. Go.
Are you an Uptown girl?
Oh, yes.
Okay, there we go. That's why I thought you were going to pick a freedom music or a theme song.
Let's get Craig on the line. Craig, you're on Talkback. Hi, go ahead.
Hey, good morning. I don't know if this is around Catherine's line or not, but then you had that, I think it was a young lady that texted in that your freedom ends when another's begins or so. And then you got to deal with Peter and his cake.
Okay.
Anyway, Ramona, she jumped pretty quickly to the support of the gay person to have her cake made by you, or his or her cake made by you. But then when it came to Victoria's Secret, she said that you could just look right on down the way. You didn't have to look to the Victoria's Secret, although...
Well, a lot of that, I think one of the differences here, and please forgive me for jumping in here, Ramona, is someone is coming to me personally asking for my services. Okay,
Right.
Walking down the mall, whether to look to the left or to the right, I'm not turning into Victoria's Secret to buy anything. So I can just ignore what's going on around me because it doesn't really affect me personally, right? Are we talking about?
Yeah.
Is that where we're going?
Right. I was thinking in terms of you. I'm actually going to you for a service versus I'm walking down a mall.
Right.
And another thing, Craig, I think that Ramona is exhibiting a professorial kind of role here in that she's kind of taking the devil's advocate position of the opposite of whoever is calling. So you'll see her You'll see this with lots of professors. They won't tell you exactly where they stand, but wherever you stand, they'll be opposed to it.
Exactly. Well, what I try to do is get you to think.
I can complain about Victoria's Secret and demand that they put britches on those gals if I go in there and buy it.
All right. Thanks for the call.
Hey, good day.
Appreciate it. All right. So, Walt, you're on Talkback. Go ahead, sir.
Hey, hi, Peter and John and Ramona.
Hey, Walt. How you doing, man?
Great. Listen, I have kind of a philosophical or big picture question to Ramona.
Right.
There's a book out called Liberty versus Equality, but for purposes of this discussion, and it's extremely complex to read, but entertaining,
Yes.
is what in today's society is more important, equality or freedom?
Well, I suppose it depends on what political party you talk to. And I'm not saying that completely facetiously or that. It's that these are actually part of, I think, our values. I mean, we value both. And the question is, of course, our values don't always mesh nicely together. They are sometimes in conflict with each other. And so we've got a long tradition of stressing individual liberty. We've also got a tradition of stressing equality of opportunity for people so they can maximize their individual potential. But inevitably, those two things are going to conflict. If I am an employer, I want to exercise my liberty as a baker to serve whomever I please. If I am, though, a person looking for a job, I want an equal opportunity to apply for a range of jobs without being discriminated against because of my sexual orientation, my gender, my racial background. So I think these are very much dynamic values that we've got that are constantly going to be in tension. Depending on which one you tend to stress more than the other, often defines our politics.
Or even if you want to narrow it down to something that a lot of people deal with these days, your ability to communicate during work hours. So the internet gives us a lot of capabilities to chat with our friends or play video games while we're at work. And a lot of people have gotten in trouble with this, with management either reading their emails or taking over their emails.
Yes.
And governing what they're able to do while they're at work. And there's a lot of questions on where does my time begin and your time end, and what can I do with my time while I'm at work, things like that.
And by the way, that's a conflict of my liberty versus your liberty.
Mm-hmm.
My liberty as an employer to regulate your time when you're working for me versus your liberty to get on the internet and do what you wish on the internet. So there, even within our concepts of liberty can be in tension.
But this is where you come into a possible contractual arrangement where
Yes. Yes.
you say, okay, John, I'm monitoring your internet usage. So
Right.
the hour and a half that you spent playing video games, I'm not going to pay you for, even though you were sitting in my business using my equipment.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
So because you weren't doing my business.
Right. And that's right.
So does that make sense?
Contract fairly entered into.
Walt, does that?
Yeah, and the follow-up question to that is, I know in the micro scheme of things, Ramona's exactly right, but in a macro sense, if a country can't do its self-determination and set how it wants to form itself, then equality is meaningless.
I don't understand what you mean.
If the United States can't self-determine how it's going to arrange its affairs and structure its government, then the concept of equality is just kind of out the window. I mean, it's just you can promote it, but if there isn't a sound structure for government to maintain order, well, then all the equality in the world will not survive.
So
it'll just be anarchy.
It sounds to me like what you're saying, Walt, and please correct me if I'm wrong, and I know you will, Ramona, is in order to be able to provide equality, you have to have a structure within where freedom can work. Is that right?
Yes, I think. Well, in other words, I think what Walt's pointing out is that order. These things also can go together too, right? You need to have some liberty in order to have equality of opportunity, etc.
Yes.
Right, but
Yes, exactly.
Right. Now, Isaiah Berlin, by the way, made a very interesting point here. He said, what he was saying about freedom being an end in itself is that, yes, it is a value that's very important among other values like equality of opportunity. And he was very careful to say, I'm not saying that freedom is the ultimate only value that we should embrace. Because when you go down that road, you got to be careful. You end up being very dogmatic, right? In the name of liberty, let McCarthyism begin. You know, in the name of liberty, boy, you can do a lot of nasty things. So he was saying, no, liberty is a value. We should value it for its own sake, but it's not the only value. There are these other values that are also important to us as well.
So in your view, what's the hierarchy of values?
Well, I don't want to go to hierarchy. I know you want me to, but
Okay.
I'm not going to,
Okay,
because,
okay.
again, I think these are all very important values.
Okay, Walt, we got to take a break,
hey.
man. Thanks
Hey, thank you.
Thanks for the call. It's always a pleasure, sir. Walt's a monthly guest as well,
Great.
Walt Curo.
Good question.
Tyler, we're going to get you on here in a moment, and we have lines open. John's answering phones right now, 721-1290. We will be right back. All right, we're back on Talkback. 721-1290 is the number. John, you got a Facebook comment. Go ahead.
I got a couple of them. Elena posted a definition of freedom. Freedom, noun, to ask nothing, expect nothing, and depend on nothing. That's from Ayn Rand, I believe.
Okay.
Oh, yep, it is. She even quoted at the end there. David says, self-government or freedom without self-control is self-destructive.
Oh, nice.
I think that's a good one. By the way, that actually goes back to the other view of freedom that predates Mr. Berlin, which is the Kierkegaardian view of freedom between aesthetic and ethical views of freedom. And aesthetic freedom, for example, would be the kind of person that says, I like all kinds of music, or I like all kinds of art, because they haven't really taken the time to focus in and choose a type that they like or can aesthetically appeal. They basically are following their fancy wherever they will. They're directed by their base desires.
Will-o'-the-wisps.
Yeah. And then ethical freedom being the ability to say, I'm going this way to make myself this kind of person. I'm doing this to make myself this kind of creature. I have the ability to create myself through my choices, kind of.
I'm
freedom.
making a bologna sandwich.
I am making this, yes, myself. Another question or comment. This is from Elena. She says, I guess that the braless teen, this is the Helena scenario that was posted earlier on Peter's discussion, represents positive freedom, while the Muslim mayor of London is an example of negative freedom. Sadiq Khan, quote, there will be no more body shaming advertisements on the tube.
Okay, again, I think a little confusion with the terminology.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is I know you want to keep saying negative is bad and positive is good. Actually, the braless one is, I don't know if that's the right phrase. Anyway, it's mostly about choice. I should have the choice to do as I choose. And that's,
she wants negative freedom.
right, exactly. She wants, freedom is a good in and of itself, and then let me just decide what I do with it. Whereas in the other scenario, the mayor, this is more positive. This is now suggesting, oh, wait a minute now, in a free society, this is the criteria that we expect or we want.
I think another way to think of it, negative and positive. Negative freedoms from the viewpoint of the governments are freedoms that the government defends, protects, your safety, your ability to live your life, not be robbed from, those sorts of things.
Right.
And the other ones are freedoms that government would promote, your ability to get an education, your ability to get a job, welfare, Social Security, these things would all be under the banner of positive.
Yeah, just be careful narrowing it to just government promoting these things. It may be that I want freedom because it will promote my intellectual growth, and my intellectual growth is what I'm valuing. I want freedom because I want to be happy. So these are also positive too.
Okay, we're going to get another caller here. I believe Tyler is on line 3. Good morning. Is this Tyler? Is this you?
Yeah.
Okay, Tyler, what's up?
So now I've got good reverb in this phone. That's awesome. I was calling in about the bra thing and the mall Victoria's Secret thing. I recently graduated from college a couple years back, and I'm a middle-aged, 35. I'm 37 now.
Careful.
Well, I'm telling you, I want to go down this road, and it's really going to kind of shake things up a little bit. But yoga pants, okay? You guys had a caller earlier about a woman walking around the mall having a problem looking at Victoria's Secret or walking past it.
Right.
Try being a happily married man with no kids, middle 30s, going to college as a non-traditional student. Even in the wintertime, these women would walk around in yoga pants. It doesn't make any sense to me, but they have the freedom to do it. You understand?
Well, I have to say, I have a beef too. I have male students who will come in sometimes with pajamas on in my class, right? Yeah.
That's a distraction.
Yeah.
I'm guessing these are not sexy pajamas. These are flannel. Yeah.
Right, but still.
Yeah.
Well, people go through life that way, though. If you go to Walmart, you'll be amazed. Okay.
Maybe it wouldn't be amazed.
Well, yeah. So
All right.
when it comes to freedom, I personally think it's a matter of personal responsibility. It's a matter of how we react with other people. It's a matter of how we consider other people's feelings, emotions, things that they might be going through. And we want our own freedom to act the way we want. But we also should take into account other people.
Gotcha. Tyler, we're up against the break, man. Thanks. Thanks for the call. So with the 1 minute timeout, go ahead, John.
Oh, I just thought the word should was funny because, I mean, the question is, it should or you must?
I think you're making actually a good point about positive freedom, Tyler. All right. In other words, that there are maybe some issues unto which we value freedom, but it comes with responsibility. So you put a nice criteria to freedom being responsible.
Okay. Marilyn, we're going to get your call in 1 minute. We'll be right back. Hey, we're back on Talk Back, and let's get right back to the phones because we are rapidly running out of time. All right, Marilyn, you're on Talk Back with Dr. Gray. Hi.
Hello. Okay, here's another good quote from Thomas Jefferson. God who gave us life gave us liberty. Can the liberties of a nation be secure when we have removed a conviction that these liberties are the gift of God? Indeed, I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just and that his justice cannot sleep forever. So I noticed, Peter mentioned the hierarchy of values, and curious if the subject of God ever comes up in her class.
Okay, let's ask her. So what do you think, Dr. Gray?
Oh, yes, Marilyn. Well, those are my two favorite subjects, politics and religion. So
welcome to Talk Back every week.
And so, yes, they do. And I believe that quote also from Jefferson was one that he was also making reference to slavery. Jefferson, as you may know, owned quite a few slaves, but he certainly didn't approve the institution of slavery as well. And so the idea about, justice cannot sleep and God is great, I think that certainly is important. If you attach being free with being a God-loving people, you're definitely going into a positive direction as well, just so that you're aware of that as well. You've got now another criteria to be free is to be God-respecting.
Okay. So, in other words, you have this if you have this.
Exactly. Right.
And in the founding, a lot of the founders would say, if you're not God-respecting, if you're not following these rules of ethical behavior, then you won't have freedom anyway. It's all going to devolve into chaos and anarchy.
Exactly. Well, and Jefferson's ideas on religion are very fascinating because he wrote about Jesus as well. And he was a deist. He believed that God existed, but God was like a great watchmaker that stepped away, set everything in motion, and then human beings. It was up to them what they did with the rest of their lives.
Okay, let's get Harry on the line. Harry, good morning. You're on Talkback. Hi.
Yeah, good morning. I would question about whose God do you love, but also this idea, individual freedoms is great, but I like this quote, my freedom to swing my arms ends at the end of your nose. But when there's noses everywhere, then my motion is really limited. So I'm just saying that as more people in this, the country gets more populated, our society gets more interconnected, our individual freedoms is bound to be more limited, I would think. It's just a natural occurrence because, like I say, there's more noses everywhere.
That's a really good point of view, I think.
Yeah. And also, and to quote a philosopher, freedom is just another word for nothing left to lose.
I want to follow up on Harry's point here, Ramona. It seems to me that perhaps one of the reasons why America leans towards that negative liberty is because of the expansive West.
Yes, but Harry's what he was saying about with so many people now have noses. I just think of that. There's a great Ford auto commercial. And the Ford auto slogan used to be, "We provide the keys to freedom." And now there's just a little problem with that, and that's if a lot of people got keys, right? then you have to have traffic rules and regulations. To which, so I think, yes, I think there's always been that idea of going out west where there's more space, more openness, less crowdedness. You can choose more.
The whole concept of the romanticism of the mountain man.
Exactly.
Yeah, you just go
right.
up.
And if we went out of frontier, hey, we got the moon to colonize.
It's really funny to talk to people from heavily urbanized societies, even in America. Like you talk to someone from New York. Oh, you can't have a Bloody Mary on Sunday in New York? Weird. I just assumed you guys are liberal and egalitarian. You could do whatever you want, que sera, sera. But no.
Well, that goes back to our Puritan founding.
Sure, apparently not. But over here in Montana, we do whatever the heck we want. We'll go shooting afterwards. It's it's kind of weird. And I certainly do get a sense that you have more liberty when there's less people around.
Yes, when there is a frontier. And Berlin used to talk about a frontier of freedom, right? There was this area of freedom to which people can choose. It just, again, in a way that can be a bit abstract, right? And it's very funny. I found coming here, I'm originally from California, urban area. And when I came to Colorado and Montana, here people say, we're the real West. California is not the real West. So again,
even though you're further west.
That's right. It has nothing to do with geography, right?
Right.
By the way, the Puritans drank a lot. They drank.
Yes, but they're controlled, not on Sunday, though.
Actually, they were forced to drink on Sunday for communion.
We got about a minute and a half left in the show. So let's wrap up. Since we're done with callers, it looks like. Let's wrap up. What have we learned so far today, in your view, Ramona?
Well, I think there's some important questions that we should always take away and ask ourselves. One is feeling free the same as being free? I think this is something we need to ask ourselves and think about.
Perception versus reality.
Exactly.
Okay.
Subjective interpretation of one's freedom, right? If you think you're free, you're therefore free. But maybe that's not the same as being free. Also, to choices. Maybe it's not, and I think this occurs with our election now, I think we need to ask ourselves not just how many choices of candidates do we have, and that sets up whether we're free, but how significant are those choices?
Yeah, I feel like I don't have any good choices.
Well, right, and I'm sure there are other people that feel that way as well. And so, therefore, we've got to ask ourselves, and I think this is something that positive freedom can contribute to this discussion, is this idea of, what is significant range of choices that makes us free? Is being able to purchase 27 brands of peanut butter in the supermarket a criteria for whether you're really free or not? Well, I'm not sure.
Chunky only.
Yeah.
And we are out of time. Thank you so much. You got to come back, okay? Seriously. All right? So what's coming up on tomorrow's fabulous free show, by the way?
Free show. We'll speak with Mark Thane for a little while.
All right. And you guys have a great day, and we'll see you tomorrow.